So as I prepare to leave my conference, I'm kind of left. I've got a panel to speak on here in 20 minutes or something like that, and it's about Get Woke, Go Broke and movies and video games, things like that. And I realized that I had never really communicated the specifics of my beliefs on this phenomena, and I think, why wouldn't I do it right before the panel? Now, I think that most companies do the math on this. They figure there are three possible outcomes. The most likely outcome, I believe, is nothing. It's a few more retweets, and you'll offend as many people as you'll win, and ultimately you'll see a zero sum in terms of sales, but you'll have good web analytics because Twitter and games journalists, in terms of video games, and then media in terms of movies, definitely lean towards gobbling a lot of that stuff up. The second most likely scenarios, I'd have to see some data, but they are either, as you've probably figured out, it's going to work for you or it's not going to work for you. In the scenario where it works for you, I believe you didn't have much of an audience in the first place. Meaning, let's say you're an indie game. Nobody's heard of you. But you go out of your way to pander to a particular audience. Just like you might if you were kind of the anti get woke crowd, right? Let's see if this works. Probably not. So if you were like the anti-crowd, or if you were the crowd that would be open to these type of things, you might never hear of this movie or game. And I think it's probably more effective in games, to be honest with you, because they're easy to buy. They're a purchase that you can make while you're emotionally involved. You can just go buy it right now. Whereas we look at something like Gillette and their razors, that is an example of, I believe, like a good example of Get Woke, Go Broke. Or a better example would be the feminist coffee cafe in Australia, I believe, that literally charged men more money and had all sorts of weird anti-male rules. They went out of business in like a year. And I mean, that's kind of like your quintessential Get Woke, Go Broke scenario. When you have something like Gillette, I think they're obviously already on a downward trend. They tried to do something to stir things up and get some cheap press, which they did, but I don't think it was enough to reverse the obvious trend of people moving away from buying Mach 3 razors for $50 at the grocery store or wherever, instead of just using something like dollarshaveclub.com/thequartering or Harry's or some other reasonably priced razor system. I think the market itself has simply shifted away from accepting these high-priced razors. Another example of a company I think that, or an example of a company that I think has a net zero or zero-sum benefit from it. So I talked about a company that is definitely a Get Woke, Go Broke. That would be like your coffee cafe. And then you have the company like Gillette, which definitely saw a lot of backlash, but I don't think anyone, you may have accelerated in the short term that trend. For example, Nike, they saw a brief boost, but ultimately sales of a lot of their merchandise is down. Viewership of the NFL is down, and absolutely some of that has to deal with kneeling. I can be very honest and say that I don't want to watch football on TV and have to deal with two commentators who know nothing about the issue talk about how stunning and brave it is for a multimillionaire to kneel. And absolutely, I watch less football now, specifically because of that. And there's just no way that I'm the only person that is like that. So scenarios where companies, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I have kind of a lot of ideas in my head, and people are texting me to get downstairs. But example of a company I think that has a net zero effect would be something like Ben and Jerry's, where their entire online presence is 100% woke. But I don't think a lot of Ben and Jerry's customers are following them on Twitter. The people that will retweet Ben and Jerry's, you know, sharing out statistically inaccurate information that slants or that pushes a particular ideology, these people can't afford Ben and Jerry's. These are the type of people that live 2-studio apartment and have a schedule in which they can all use the bathroom in. They aren't buying $5 tubs and pints of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I just don't believe that they are. Similarly, you look at companies like Starbucks. While a lot of these woke brigade work there, I don't think a lot of these people are spending $5 a day on Starbucks coffee. Most of the people that are buying Starbucks are business people, people with actual jobs. They're buying it on the way to work. They're buying it as a pick-me-up in the afternoon. They're not following Starbucks on Twitter. They don't really know or care about whether or not they have Christmas cups. This is another example of a company that can be as woke as they want online, and their customers, the real customers, generally don't care. So you have examples of all ends of the spectrum, and I think that companies that choose to go down this path, big ones, they do the math. They know who their real customers are. Let me give you a great example. Marvel, all right? For as woke as all of the press around Marvel movies is, in particular starting now with Captain Marvel and then Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame was not like overly woke. They had one cheeseball moment where it was like Woman Assemble, and even my wife, who doesn't use Twitter and doesn't use Facebook and has no idea about these things, leaned over and was like, ugh, what was that? That was cringy. Well, she didn't say cringy because she doesn't even know what that means. She said that was awkward or dumb or something. But for the most part, that movie was relatively standard fare. Disney knows this. Disney knows that the real fans of their Marvel movies aren't going to be dissuaded to see them by some article on Salon.com or something like that. They're just going to go see their movies. You could argue that in Avengers Endgame, Captain Marvel was OP, and there is lore to support her level of power. However, it still feels forced and awkward in the film. But ultimately, Captain Marvel had about 10 minutes of screen time in like a 3-hour movie. For all of the endless articles, Marvel knew that they were going to get written by the media talking about how stunning and brave the movie is. They played the media perfectly. They had endless articles written about how Captain Marvel was going to change things and how she was so great and powerful, but she's irrelevant in the movie. Completely could have cut her out, and the movie doesn't change at all. And ultimately, Marvel knew that. Disney knew that. They're just playing the media. You didn't see Disney's coming out and saying like, ooh, Captain Marvel might be in love with a woman or some. You had the media asking those questions, and Marvel and Disney and Kevin Feige and people like that excellently playing them to get endless free articles, endless retweets. The actors in the movie themselves, obviously all being from the Hollywood ilk, are in general extremely woke or very silent. And that's just the way that Hollywood is. I don't think there is a huge percentage of people that agree with Chris Evans' politics that go out of their way to see a movie that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. Meaning, Disney can fan the flames of all this wokeness, like The Last Jedi and all this kind of stuff, but their core fans don't care about it. It's just a net positive for them anyway, especially if they don't put it in the movies. I mean, we saw what happened with Dark Phoenix, which had several kind of woke moments. The movie completely failed at the box office, losing more than $100 million for Disney. Now, why it failed, it was a multitude of things. But, ultimately, I think the whole terminology and the science behind get woke, go broke is really just a calculated risk. You can have companies that, like Nike, where I think they've had both positive and negative effects with it, backing Colin Kaepernick, removing their Betsy Ross shoes, all this stupid stuff. But in general, people that really are in the know about that stuff, Nike sells shoes to kids and athletes. Adults don't buy Nikes, not very many of them anyway. They're in the New Balance stuff and all this other kind of shoe gear. So, Ben and Jerry's, the people that are retweeting them online are just useful idiots that they can't afford their ice cream anyway. So I think that it's funny to me when it goes wrong. There are certainly times when it can go right, except